Welcome back to Soulrocker podcast, and today on this little special series that I'm doing, I wanted to talk about some stuff that, not some stuff, but like this experience that I've had that I feel like, so a lot of people don't know this about me because I've never really shared it, and I'm not the only one that has experienced stuff like this. And I think a lot of people would be shocked to know, but I also want to not only express, I keep saying this over and over and over all the time. This stuff and expressing this kind of experiences for me is a very healing. And I know that throughout my journey, coming across people, whether it's through books or through blogs, or through YouTube people where people are sharing their experiences, podcasts, all kinds of things. And they share like some of the things that they've overcome or they had to deal with. And it was very healing because I was able to relate and feel like, oh, I'm not the only one. And sometimes it helps put things into perspective. And there's just a lot that has come out of it, and so that's a huge reason why I also want to share, not just because it's so healing to be able to express everything. And I sometimes like to do it through now podcast, and sometimes I also like to do it through writing, whether it's something that I'm writing on a personal space for just myself and trying to like do shadow work with it, but also even to potentially share this in a book someday, and so what I'm referring to, if depending on how I title this, but a lot of people don't know how much I've struggled with the finances and in my life, and actually even being homeless. Now, I have a really bad memory. Let's just get that out of the way, that I have a really bad memory just from some trauma stuff that has happened to me as a kid, but even also experiencing all these things that I'm about to share has been very traumatic for me as well. And so a lot of this has played a role as to how I don't have a lot of my memory is fuzzy, and my timelines are really jacked up. And so what I want to also express here is I'm not going to share things in a timeline manner because I simply can't. But in the timeline doesn't really matter, right? But the experiences do. So essentially, when I was born, and I was my parents were together and they were married, and my mom ended up getting a divorce. And I don't know if this is necessarily the place that I want to like share that aspect of what happened and all of that stuff. The point is that my mom ended up leaving my dad. It was just very unsafe and unhealthy environment for my mom, and even she came to realize that it was also for myself. So she decided to leave, and she went back to her parents' house, and we lived with my grandparents all the way up until I was about 5, and my mom when I was 5 was when she finally got her own apartment, and it was a small apartment. And when she moved in, she didn't have like anything. She had to buy everything from scratch little by little. And so even when she first got her apartment, because she didn't have like a full furnished home to bring a kid in, I wasn't always there with my mom for a little while. So not until my mom kind of was able to furnish the place, and one of the first things that she bought was actually my bed. And it was not until she was able to really kind of like have a table for me to sit at and things like that was when she started to bring me home. Up until from 5 till about 15, we lived in this apartment, and this apartment felt like home, and it was homey. And I mean, I had everything there. It was small, but my room, like, I had everything in there. Like, it was overly packed. I mean, it was like a little mini like dream room that any little girl would want. I mean, at one point I had a water bed. It's like this full-sized waterbed. And then I remember getting a canopy. And I just had, I had everything that I could desire in this room, like so many toys and Barbies and things to play in. And I had this like little bookshelf in there, and it was a very stable home while I was there. And then my mom ended up experiencing. So before I go into the experience, I'm actually editing right now, and I noticed that I completely forgot this one small, and it wasn't like anything huge, but before that kind of happened, we did move to a small town, and I was still pretty young. My mom was a cosmetologist since I was like, I think 5 or something. And so, we had moved for like the summer to this other small town nearby. And, it was not a bad experience at all. Like my mom had gotten a nice apartment and it was nice there. But it just ended up not working out with this. She was going to be, I think, like a co-owner of a salon with this other girl, and it didn't work out. So we ended up going back to. It's so funny how we ended up going right back to the same apartment in the same apartment building and the same actual apartment. When she was working, she ended up getting her back hurt, and it was like really severe, like, discs, all, I don't even know exactly what she experienced, but I know that she experienced like a situation with her back that she ended up having to have surgery. And I can't remember exactly how old was I was like probably 13 or something. I don't know. And so she, it was an awful experience to see my mom having to be in bed rest, not being able to work anymore. Just a lot of stuff that I don't think that I've ever fully grasped how difficult that experience was for myself, as well as I can imagine for her, even worse. But still, it's a feeling that as a kid, it's hard to, when you're still too young to understand certain things at that age. And, as kids, your mind just doesn't have the capacity to think beyond, it's a very like ego and selfish, and that's just normal. It's not that like kids are selfish and like, so sometimes it bothers me when I hear people saying, these adults are saying those things to their kids, and they're like, oh, you're so selfish. And it's like, well, duh, that's just how our brains work for X amount of years until we start to mature, and all we care and think about is our safety and how we can explore and be ourselves and not have to worry about adult problems, because we'll have to deal with that for a long time, once we get there. And so it was very difficult. And obviously with the difficulty of her not being able to work anymore, she wasn't able to work, and that really started the financial kind of like spin on how things just started to fall apart. So we ended up having some issues right around when I was like 15. My mom, was able to walk again and all this other stuff that it took her a while to even get to. And at the time, my mom had this, or she has these, not at the time, but like she has a couple cousins that have lived like they're in another like small town, probably like 45 minutes away or whatever. And it's like a 40-minute drive west. I forgot. But at this point I can't think. I'm just trying to think about this topic here. But so at the time we would visit often. We were still living at this apartment, and we would visit often her family members, some cousins of hers. And she became, one time like we were there, and one of her cousins like friends showed up, and she like, it was all like fun and games or whatever and cool, and they ended up like getting along. And so like I remember us going, and often they would kind of come over and be like, oh, she's coming over, like, yeah, let's all get together. And right around that age at like 15 was we were having some issues with like, because they ended up selling the apartment building to like a new owner, and this new owner was like just very shady compared to the last owner. So we were having problems with this apartment owner, and we figured that like there's just a lot going on, and so like we were looking for a place to move to. But it was really difficult when we didn't have the funds to really move somewhere, and then we had pets. That was, you know, it always is difficult to move around when you have pets, because there's a lot of places that don't take pets, you know, or if you have, and we had multiple pets. So on top of that, it's like, it's just difficult all the way around for people that don't accept pets as renters, or, you know, just it being inconvenient. Certain places, it's like, it doesn't make any sense to like live in a super high rise kind of like situation, you know, when you have dogs that you have to like go down and take out to potty in the location. What if it's very difficult to have a area for them to go? It's just, you know, it's a lot that you have to consider. And so on top of that, like I said, with the funds just not being there made it even worse. So this one time, like we were hanging out with my mom's cousin and her lady friend or whatever, and she was there, and we were all talking about like this situation. My mom was like expressing like, this is what we're going, you know, dealing with, blah blah blah. And the lady was like really kind enough to be like, hey, you know, we are willing to like take you and your daughter in, and you know, you can live with us for a short, you know, amount of time until you figure out what you can do. And we're like, oh my god, like, you know, thank you. And we ended up thinking about it, but like we really had no option, and we were like, sure. And this lady, she was married and she had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, and they were actually around our age. Like the guy was about my age, and then the daughter was like 2 years younger than I was or so, and we're all like in high school or whatever. And we ended up going over there, and we put some of our stuff in like in the storage, and we ended up moving out there. And I ended up going to like the high school over there for a few months, because we were probably there like, I don't even know, maybe like 3-4 months or something like that. And my mom like wasn't working at the time. We didn't have a car at the time, and we were able to take our dogs, and we went there, and the lady like knew that like, okay, we don't have a car, we really don't have any money to give her while we're there, you know. But my mom, you know, essentially kind of expressed that like, okay, I can't pay you for us staying there, but I will do my best with other ways to pay you. And you know, they didn't have like a huge home or anything. Actually, like the daughter, we ended up sleeping in the same room with the daughter, and the daughter had like a somewhat of a decent sized room, and she had 2 beds in there. And me and my mom had to sleep together, and I think it was it a full size? Might have been a full size bed. I don't remember. And we, you know, shared this room. We didn't have really any space. It didn't have privacy hardly. And my mom, you know, I went to school. My mom stayed back home while everyone was gone to school and work. And she every single day was like, because my mom and she actually taught me to be very, you know, courteous of other people's space and how we, you know, how we approach things and people. And, you know, she would tell me like, be on your best behavior, and like, don't ask for anything, and like, don't, you know, just, you know, don't make too much noise. And I've always been a really quiet, like, type of person anyways, and chill. And so my mom would like, she would clean the whole house every day. She would have it really, really clean. She would even do the laundry. And, you know, often like when the lady would come home and like cook dinner, she'd be like, you want me to help you in anything? And like, I feel like the lady like was like, no, because she wanted to, you know, feel like, okay, I'm doing something. And I feel like at first like everything was fine, but then it's like all of a sudden there was like this energy shift that was starting to happen. And you can tell like the lady was just like not happy for us to be there. Like something was bothering her beyond just like money. And you know, we wouldn't even be like, oh, let's always constantly be in your space, and like you come home, and like, you know, we would try to like go into a corner and just stay there, so like the family time could have their family time and not have us around all the time, you know. So we were really like thoughtful in that way. And you know, we weren't like going into their fridge and just eating all kinds of stuff. Like we were, you know, we're just not the kind of people. And it became really uncomfortable because there was no communication as to what this lady was feeling, why was she acting different, and we just never really knew. And it got to the point where felt so uncomfortable that we didn't even want to like sit with them at the dinner table. And then we were like trying to figure out like how we can go and walk to get like pizza, or how we could, you know, eat just scraps if we could. Like it just became that uncomfortable that we ended up I remember at the time my mom, and this is even before like we moved there, when like the AOL chat room and stuff like that was like new, like this new thing, and her cousin was the one that introduced us to it. And so my mom and I, like, we would sometimes go on there and just like bullshit and stuff like that, but my mom ended up kind of using it to connect to other people. And my mom ended up connecting with this one man who she became like friends with, I guess you can say. And they were talking a lot about like, they talked a lot about like just like metaphysical type of things and topics and stuff like that. And so that's how she kind of became friends and connected with, because, you know, it's sometimes really hard to find like-minded people with certain things that you're interested in. So anyways, she got in contact with them. We stayed in contact with this person. Well, she did quite often. And I guess at one point, like, we were there and she was in contact with them and kind of was expressing, you know, I'm sure she was like sharing her experience and what she was going through. And he ended up offering us to go with him. Now, at the time, my mom had this boyfriend still, and he ended up just moving away to another friend when we moved with this lady, because he was the only one that was working. And in order for him to stay closer to his job, he ended up going somewhere else to stay. Well, when we accepted to go with this man, he actually was from New York. And like, I guess out of desperation, right, and to what circumstances we were in, we ended up going to this, driving with the car that we had, which was the one that ended up my mom's ex-boyfriend ended up keeping. And so he ended up you know, we ended up getting like all uniting again, and we took this car, and this was like a small like Impala, right? And we had our 3 dogs, and we fit like just our main necessity clothes and stuff like that. And I remember driving, and it was like a 17-18 hour drive in the back seat with 3 dogs, and I was like smushed because we had the 3 dogs, and then underneath my feet, you know, because we filled the trunk as much as we could, and there was not much space in the back because of the dogs. And you know, we had their food in the back seat as well with us. So I had to fill the space that normally, you know, you put under your feet with like a suitcase and stuff like that. So I was like smushed the entire time. This most uncomfortable drive and like experience ever. And we finally got there, and it was very like devastating for me, because there was a sense of like we kind of got bamboozled in a way, because this man was like, oh yeah, like I live in New York, and like he made it sound like he lived like on the outskirts of like wherever the fuck we were closest to. I think it was like it was in Buffalo. It was like near Syracuse kind of area. He made it sound like, oh, we're just like I'm on the outside of Syracuse type of area. I'm like, you know, it's a nice little town and it's calm and blah, blah, blah. So as we're getting closer to this, you know, place, we ended up stopping one time, or on our way to like this like small town in like this Walmart. And this Walmart was like, felt like, I don't even know. Like I couldn't even tell you what it felt like. It felt like we were like some aliens, because we walked in and it kind of had like this hillbilly, like, I don't know what kind of vibe it had, but it was like a bunch of like white folks that looked racist as fuck. And I'm not saying this like I'm not racist. I'm just saying that this is what it was, right? And like we were looked at, it was hella weird. And I was like, I did not feel safe at all. Like at any minute, I thought there was somebody's gonna pull like fucking gun at us or whatever. And so we just were like beginning to question like, what the fuck? Because as we kept driving closer to the location, to the destination, we ended up seeing like, hey, this is like in the middle of fucking nowhere. Like, it was way worse than what he kind of made it seem like. And it was giving like sketch vibes. And as soon as we, got to the house, he had a decent sized house, not too big, not too small. But this man, like, in person, gave me sketch vibes. Like, he looked like he was like gonna like murder us and like keep us in like a basement and like chop us up. Like, it was given that kind of vibe. And I just did not feel comfortable or safe at all, because to me, he was a stranger. I mean, the entire time we were there, it was okay. It was cool. He was nice, I guess you can say, like, and he made us feel home and comfortable, and he was like willing to share his space and his food and just everything with us, which was really nice, and then we only stayed there for like not even a week, because I was like, I cannot, like, where would I go to school, like, and what are even the schools nearby? Like, I just don't feel safe. I don't feel comfortable. I'm so used to having diversity in where I'm from. And to me, it was like I was being very selfish in ways still. And I was just like over it. And I was like, I do not want to be here. We ended up convincing my mom. At first, she was like, no, I don't know. Like, I don't know what was going on. She wasn't really expressive at the time, at least not with me. And I was not understanding a lot. And but there is this one day where I don't know if there was something that happened, or maybe she started to kind of see things differently. I'm not sure. I can't speak for her. But all I can say is that, there was this one day that he was like, oh, I'm gonna be out, because he liked to go like out into like hiking and like hunting or something like that. And so he was like, oh, I'm gonna go out and drive out, somewhere nearby, and I'm just gonna be out for the entire day, and I'm gonna be, hiking around and doing all this other stuff. And he had a dog as well, and so, or more, I think he had one or two, I don't know, but telling you guys, my memory is really bad. And so we're like, oh, okay. And so we were just like, dude, we better just like go now, because we don't know if we express this to him while he's here, like what is he gonna do, how is he gonna take it, and so we just felt like it was the safest and best thing to do was leave at the time, that the day that he had left and was going to be gone for a while. So my mom wrote this note, and she left his keys, and like, we never stole anything. We never took anything because we're not those kind of a people, and we just left, packed up all our shit in the car, and there we go back again in another crazy ass trip back home. And, essentially, just like without going into timelines at this point, because I don't remember, I know that I've experienced a lot. Like, there was one time where we went back to my grandparents' house a couple times, and we had experiences where my mom wasn't really, she didn't get along very well with her parents. There was one time we were staying at my grandparents', and the first time we stayed there, like, it wasn't bad. We stayed there for several months, and my mom ended up like... This next portion of the podcast is sponsored by Wicked Tires. Now, we all know that tires can be expensive, and especially with the holidays coming. We can all use a way to save money, and at Wicked Tires, you can save a lot by purchasing from their wide variety of used tires. The guys at Wicked Tires test all the tires and make sure that there are no leaks. Not just that, but they also make sure that their tires have plenty of tread. So what are you waiting for? Go on to Wicked Tires and save big. They also offer great prices on new tires for those who are interested. Check them out on the corner of East State and Alpine Road. Creating the basement into like this little like small... what do you call it? Like a studio apartment, right? 'Cause she had like a little bedroom in there with the door and everything. And then she had like the area that was like the biggest area of the basement. And she, we had a computer down there, and we had like a rug and like a little entertainment center with our couch. And we had took some of the stuff that we had put into storage in there and kind of created like a little place so we were not necessarily taking up so much space within my grandparents' house. And they ended up giving me one of their, they had a room that was sort of like a spare, and they ended up having given that to me. And so I, just had the bed in there. It was a small room, and the closet in there, and had a table in there where I put my stuff, some of my other stuff, and my computer, and that was it. And at the time, like, I didn't have a job, and my mom, and I don't know how old was I think I was, at this time I was already like 21. And there was a lot that happened between like 20 to 21, to be honest, and how much we've jumped around in that period of time. It was really crazy because we were there for a few months, and things were okay. My mom was still working part-time, and she's a cosmetologist, and at the time that's where she was working. There was this one time where like she got into this argument with her mom, with my grandmother, and there is this like newer person that walked into she started working there with my mom, and she was like an ex like addict, and she had went to jail for like small misdemeanors and stuff like that. And I remember my mom telling me like, oh, she was kind of like I guess she kind of came like, friendly with her or whatever. And I would tell my mom, like, I don't trust this, lady. Like, I don't know, and she would say stuff to me and stuff like that. And I'd be like, I don't know that I trust this person. My mom was like, well, she changed. Like, my mom sometimes likes to give people the benefit of the doubt, and with rightfully so. Like, I do appreciate about my mom, because, people do change. People can change. But there was just something about this lady that I was like, nah, she's not. Like, has she made changes? For sure. I can't deny that. But like, has some of her past ways still kept her, and she can easily be triggered back into that space? Yes, is how I felt. And so I guess there was like this argument that sparked within my grandma and my mom. My mom ended up sharing this with like this lady or whatever, and she the lady ends up telling us like, hey, well, why don't you come and live with us? And she's like, I live by myself. I have 2 kids, and she had a baby. He was like a toddler. He was like not even maybe 2 years old or something like that, and then or like 1.5. And then the daughter, she was maybe like 7 years old or something like that. She was still small. And I could be wrong. So like, if my mom listens to this, I'm like, no, she was not that age. Like, sorry. I just remember it to be something similar to that age. I don't know. Does it really matter if she was 7 or 10? I don't fucking know. She was still young. So anyways, this lady was like, yeah, you can come and live with us and this and that. You can bring some of your stuff. I have a lot of space, because this house is fairly on the bigger side. It was decent sized. She was like, that way you don't have to put, keep your stuff in like the storage, and it can save you some money and blah, blah, blah. So, my mom is like, yeah, I think that it would be a good idea. And I remember telling my mom, like, I don't think that that's a good idea. Like, I literally have really bad vibes about this lady, and I do not want to go over there. Like, I understand what's going on, like, with grandma, but like, maybe just let it cool down, and eventually, like, it'll be cool. Like, we're the safest here at the end of the day, even though it's terrible. We can figure something out eventually. But she was just like dead set that like, no, I need to leave, and you can stay or you can go with me. And of course, like, being always with my mom and feeling I've always had this deep sense of like, I'm responsible for my mom, which is, I've now discovered how unhealthy that has been, but that's besides the point. That's a whole nother story. So, she was just like, you can either come with me or you can stay behind. And I'm like, well, I guess I'll have to come with. Like, I don't want to. And I'm warning you, like, I have really bad vibes about this, And, but we went anyways, and we took most of our stuff, or all of our stuff, out of storage. And, we put a lot of it in the basement. And then we ended up having to, not having to, but just something that my mom ended up offering. She was like, look, I've been having this stuff in the storage. Some stuff I kept at my, we had at my grandparents' house. And she's like, at this point, I know you're in need of some of this stuff. So we can just share, my stuff, in the house. So we took, I think it was like some of the furniture we used. Like, she even like took our table, like, we had replaced her table with ours, and we just had like we will figure it out in like, you know, once whatever happens, and like, you know, but let's just use some of this stuff together. And me and my mom ended up sharing this bedroom, and we had our bed there. And, you know, we had just our basic necessity stuff. Like, we didn't worry about, like, you know, half the time I was putting my makeup in like a mirror, you know, on the floor or some shit. And then, you know, that was it. And at the time, I still did not have a job because, of course, it was difficult without having a car. And my mom, like I said, she was working, and I don't even think she had a car at the time. I don't even know how. Oh, yeah, because this is like, she was getting a ride to go to work with my grandpa, and she would just give him gas and stuff like that, and help a little bit out with her from her tips to kind of give him a little bit of, you know, money and stuff like that. But so, you know, the lady was like, oh, don't worry about it. Like, obviously you can carpool with me. We usually work the same hours anyways, and we'll just make sure that we can, because they were pretty flexible there with their hours and stuff like that, especially if they knew like the situation. So, and the lady was like, she offered me we could sign up by like the city or something, and at some program, and I could take care of like the little boy and babysit him, and then I can make some money. And I was like, cool. And, you know, we barely were like setting that whole situation up, because that takes a little while to like sign up and start getting everything rolling. And honestly, like, we stayed at this house not even that long, like a couple months, maybe. I don't even know. All of a sudden, like, things were fine. You know, there was nothing too crazy. Obviously, there was things happening and stuff like that, but nothing out of this world. You know, nothing to what just I'm about to share that came next is hella surprising in a way. But I guess we ended up kind of putting two and two together afterwards, and we're like, maybe we kind of should have anticipated something coming up, but we didn't think about that this could happen. So what I'm saying is that there was this one day where I believe it was like my aunt or something that came and picked my mom and I up. And she was like, she was going to take us and run a couple errands and stuff like that. And we told this lady, and we were like, hey, we're going to be gone just a few hours, like max 4. You know, we'll be back, and, you know, we'll see you in a little bit. Okay. And it was like, this was like early, like in the day. It was like, we probably left like by 9-10 in the morning. And come back. Tell me why the entire house is fucking empty. Like, dead ass empty. The only thing that was left were like a couple things in the garage, in the basement of ours, and our bed and like our main stuff, right? Like our clothes and stuff. Everything else was wiped the fuck out. This lady, like, dead at, and we're like, how the fuck did she move an entire house in like just that many short amount of hours? Like, she literally had planned it all fucking out somehow, got a U-Haul, was able to do something like all in one hit, and like she probably had people helping her, obviously, pull everything out as fast as possible, took all our fucking furniture and just ran. And we were like, what the fuck? And when I got there, the shock, I was shooketh. Like, I was like, what? I got so angry because it was like, Mom, I warned you about this. And I was so angry at both of them. And granted, I was 21, but there was something inside of me that was still like, I did not understand a lot at that time yet either. Like, now I look back more and I've learned a lot more and I understood things more, and I'm like, you know, but at the time it was like I had this so much anger, and I blamed and I guilted my mom so much for this experience, because it was like, if only you would have listened to me. And I don't want to say this now in a way to like make her feel bad or make her look bad, because I understand the way that like we were like stuck all the fucking time, you know, going through all these experiences. It's like, you don't even know what the fuck to do. And I know that as my mom, like, she didn't know what to do, you know, and I get that now. And how the fuck were we supposed to know that this was going to happen, you know? But still, I think that the feelings that I was having were valid. And I at the time, like, we didn't even express them and give each other like that chance and give ourselves this chance to like process everything, because we didn't have any time. Like at that time, in that moment, it was like I was so angry, and then at the same time we were like, okay, what the fuck do we do now? Because we're literally homeless. Like, we have nothing. And my mom ended up calling, I guess, like her job, and was like, yo, what happened? Like, did she come in? Has she said anything? Like, what's going on? Because this lady literally took her shit and like left. So she was like trying to find answers, you know, from like the employees at work. And one of the ladies was like, no, and you know, this and that. And she comes over like just to verify like the truth of what we're saying. And she couldn't believe her eyes. And she was like, oh, I am so sorry, and this and that. And she's like, we're like, what do we do now? Like, we have nowhere to go. We have nothing. And my mom, this lady was like, well, she's like, I think I can help. I know this man. How she knew him, I'm not really sure. But she's like, I know this man, and I feel like he'll help you. So she calls up this man. He comes over in like the short amount of time. And he's like, he's this man and doesn't even know us, but he shows up like an angel. And he's like, oh, don't worry about it. Like, come and stay with us, and you can stay in my house, and like as long as you need, and it's okay, and I understand, and that sucks, and you know, all this stuff. And we were like, oh my God, like this is so fucking extra and weird, and but also I'm like so thankful that like this all is happening. And we go to this man's house, and he's a single dad, and he has his son living there. And his son at the time wasn't working or anything because he had his broken foot. So he was like healing. And then he had his girlfriend and like son, you know, that was like, again, he was like maybe 2 years old or something. And at the time, like the girl was just kind of a stay-at-home type of mom situation going on. So we show up, and they let us keep a room. And it was just like an empty room. We had the bed, and I think it was the same bed that we ended up, I don't even know like where these beds come from or where they go, honestly, at this point. But I just know that we had a bed, and we had to share this bed. And we just pretty much stuck in this room. We would stay stuck and, you know, kind of come out only when we need to like maybe get something to eat. And at the time, like I was like, these people are complete strangers. I have no idea. I don't feel comfortable. And how am I going to just stay in the room like locked up? And I didn't even feel safe to like being like, I'll just stay locked in this room. And like just, I was like, how am I going to eat? Like, so I would go, and he was kind enough to take my mom and carpool her to the job. Luckily, like it wasn't very far from her job where he lived. So he was cool enough to do that. And then I would go with my mom to work, and I would just kind of chill there on the side, you know. And this was like a big salon, so like I was just sitting in the waiting area the whole entire time. And like we would go to lunch, and there was like some nearby like restaurants or like McDonald's, Subway, blah blah blah, that we could walk to, and just that's what we ate, you know. That was our food. And we weren't eating a lot, but obviously we were eating bad, because that was the only options that we would have. And we literally ate junk food, you know, takeout every day, all day. Very scary, because you did not know what was coming next. And just constantly having no space, constantly having to share a bed, just constantly being stressed about like what's going to happen, and feeling all kinds of different emotions, not being able to really articulate them, not even able to express them, because in ways that we would express certain feelings among one another in our worries and our stresses, and we were both kind of feeling some of the same things. And it was just like, well, at least I'm not feeling this alone. But like there was really, you know, my mom was just as confused and scared as I was. So it was like, I, as a daughter, didn't have very much of like, everything is going to be okay. Like my mom was just as like scared and didn't know, and you know, as much as I did for her to be able to comfort me, you know. And it was like we were trying to like low-key comfort each other, but like we didn't know how, because it was really difficult to even comfort one another, because it was like, well, we don't know what the hell is going on. And you know, sometimes when you're going through that experience, you don't even know what's to come. And it's just difficult. It's difficult to process because you're too worried about later and tomorrow, and so we stayed there. I don't even know how long we stayed there. It wasn't very long again. And we experienced living again at some point with my grandparents. And this time, the second time around, it was much different. Because somehow it's like after we left, the downstairs kind of like really just wasn't the same anymore, how we had it laid out. And I think at that second time around, I was not we had like I wasn't allowed to have that other bedroom because I think another of my uncles was there, and so like I didn't have the ability to have that room again, so I had to share the bedroom with my mom, and it just was really uncomfortable to have, just like that second time around just felt just even more odd and more uncomfortable than the first time. There was a period of time when I was in high school, actually. This is before I was 21, where we lived in hotels. And we lived in a couple different ones. So we lived in one for a period of time. And then we ended up moving to another one. And, we lived in these, it was like these small, Motel 6 and Red Roof Inn hotels. And the first one, we had two beds that we the two bed, next to each other. And that's where, didn't have any space. And that's where we had, I drove to school because at the time there was like cars, that we had. And that was the only thing that we can afford was a car, and the payment of the car. And to be able to barely pay for staying at the hotel, and those hotels didn't charge that much at the time, and then they gave us a discount for staying there for extended period of time. And the way that we would eat was like we had coolers where we would constantly like have to run to the store and like put in ice, and that's where we kept like our cold items. That was our refrigerator. And then we had our own microwave, and we had like a little stash corner where we kept like cereal and like little things, that we could warm up in the microwave. But it was, we at that point, like we were still eating a lot of like TV dinners and like stuff that you can heat up, and like cereal, and like that was our food. Again, I just recognize now how much of the emotions that were just suppressed, and all the things that I experienced. And at one point we ended up moving into a house finally, and we finally had our first house. We made our first purchase of a house, but the house wasn't just under my mom's name, it was under her ex-boyfriend's name. And it was a really struggle. Like we moved in, the house is decent. And for the first time I was like, oh my God, like I felt like, did we overcome this? Like, are we done with that era of struggle and all this stuff that we went through? And we lived in that house, I don't know, maybe like a couple years or something, I'm not sure. And for a little while when we moved in, we didn't have any kind of furniture. We had to build up again because obviously our furniture had been stolen from that one lady. And so I remember like having a TV and having to sit, we had like this, what are those like outside lawn chairs? And that was my seating. It was just the TV and this decent sized living room and the TV, and that was it, and so we were living there. And this house is probably like around when I was still in high school when we got this house. So we went from like the hotel to like this house. And so I was, good. And this is a time at some point where I ended up trying to commit suicide. So a few months after, in my high school year. And in my high school senior year. I think, like I said, part of it was just dealing with so much that I had dealt with And but that wasn't over, because once we lost the house to like foreclosure, we then experienced this. This is what I was saying, that like I experienced going back to like my grandparents' house that second time, but this was a couple years or whatever after, and so things were a lot different then. We moved into another house that was just, I personally consider it pretty ghetto, but it was a house that we were renting, and we were there for another short, like another couple years or something, and again, we didn't have very much furniture, and we had to accumulate some furniture because whatever happened to some of the other furniture, like we just didn't have anymore, and it just it's just so crazy how the things that I've gone through. And so where I come to this now essentially is I'm not sharing so much of like what ended up happening because after that and finally getting a home, and it's just still been a struggle, and now I live on my own, and I live on my own in my small apartment, and the way that I am getting emotional, going through everything has made me appreciate all the things that I have. Like, I often sit in my apartment and am so thankful for every single piece of item that I have. Dealing with all those struggles that I've gone through when it comes to being homeless and not having a lot of things has really made me just change into what I feel like I actually need. And I don't really care for like this huge house. I don't really care for having a ton of stuff in this house. Like, to me, it's just like having nice things, but being mindful about what I buy and what I need has become more relevant to me. And appreciating certain things a lot more just really goes a lot more in, it's taught me a lot about what's important. And it's also really made me appreciate when I finally got a job at 23, and I have always been really thankful for it. And so you'll never heard me complain, because it has been a privilege to be able to have a job and continuously progressing in my job at my company. And I think sometimes I look back and I'm like, I can't even, it's hard to really even sometimes think that was me that went through all of that. And even, it was like the first half of my life, I had a pretty stable home and everything was good. And then all of a sudden, like the second half just really became chaotic and really became just a whole different experience that I would have never thought. Like the first half, like I said, of my life, everything was like good, and I had stableness and a full furnished home, and I had all these toys and excessive, and then all of a sudden it's like I don't have anything. And I always thought it was very strange how, you hear people saying like, I had a really rough upbringing, but then it's like things obviously start to look up as they age and mature. And for me, it was like the other way around. And I remember when I first started to experience all these things, I would sometimes have these thoughts of like, am I being punished because I was really, really blessed? And I felt like I was sometimes selfish, and sometimes I received that feedback from my parents. And sometimes I would be like, is this what I get for having such a good life? Like I'm being punished? Like that's how I kind of saw it. When I first started kind of experiencing these things early on. But there was also a sense of things, especially later on when things started to shift just a little bit towards something more positive. And I started to kind of see things from a perspective just saying like, wow, this really taught me a lot about what's important, like I've been saying. And I think it was also a struggle because there was times where when I started to get a little bit more financially stable to the point where I wasn't as to where I was, at that point, it sometimes was difficult to have a little bit of control because, often when one gets deprived of something, you hear that a lot too. And even people experience, like I said, where, you go through a lot of like being deprived of a certain lifestyle when you're a kid, and then oftentimes like that becomes something that people end up spending a lot of their money on. I hear people say like, I was so deprived and I wanted shoes so bad, and then all of a sudden they become this person that just like is obsessed with shoes and they collect them and they go in excess. So going through all that experience really humbled me in so many levels, and it has made me, I guess, be able to understand other people and their experiences, and to be able to relate to people on a different level than I would have if I would have just continued with the life that I had back at that point. I don't even know, like, especially like because I went through a lot of stuff while I was still in school and not ever really sharing it with anyone. I remember a couple times when I was still in school and I was living at the hotel, for example, and a couple people knew that like I was living at the hotel, but I don't know that I necessarily shared as to like why I was living there. And some people, like some kids, like they were like, oh, that's kind of cool. And, but I was kind of ashamed of everything that I was experiencing, and no one really knew all the struggles that I had been going through. I don't really know how to close this off other than like, it's just a really wild ride. And I'm not necessarily where I want to be yet, but I think, but also the experience of having everything when I was a kid and being spoiled and going on shopping sprees as a kid and all these things, and then having to experience like complete opposite through the other half of my life has like I said, just really made me appreciate everything, and it's put things into perspective as to what I want and what I don't want. Like, you would think that I'd be really hungry for a ton of money and success, but in reality it's like I just want to live comfortably without having to stress over money, and have a home, I guess, but like, or not, I guess I would like to have a home, but I also really value time and being able to do things that I like, and being able to, I don't want to be tied down to having to feel like my life revolves around a career or money. And that's all I think about, and that money is what it brings me. Like, money brings me stability, and it brings me, that kind of a thing, obviously, and I have to work for it. But at the same time, it's not something that I want to live my life for. It's kind of helped me kind of see that perspective as well. Because even though I wasn't living like, lavishly as a kid, we had more than enough, and I was like often seen as like the kid who like was the rich kid, because I would go to school with like this, all this clothes. And I remember having friends come over, and these friends were like, oh my God, like they would come into my room. It was like they went into a palace. And, for me, that was a lot. And for other people, that was a lot. And so I think that experience really matured me in a lot of ways at a very young age. And it also, unfortunately created a lot of stress and anxiety in me at a young age, because like I said, we started to go through these problems when I was like 15, and it was just like a continuous cycle of constantly not knowing what was left and right and what was coming next. And I went through that for several years, because it wasn't until after it wasn't until basically right around 25 when things started to become more stable ever since then. So, so yeah, that is my story. And I really do appreciate anyone that has or is taking the time to listen. And, you know, I hope that somebody, it could be useful for someone out there. And thank you for listening, and thank you for the support, not only just for myself, but for the podcast, Soulrocker podcast. And until next time.